Hello, and welcome to Mind Sherlock, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Today, I bring you a brand new Sherlock Holmes mystery, filled with twists, clues, and clever deductions. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel the case together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now, let's get started. It was upon a dark October evening, as the wind howled mournfully along Baker Street and the rain clattered with ceaseless fury against the window panes, that I found myself once more in the familiar lodgings of my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. A yellow glow from the hearth cast flickering shadows across the worn rugs and cluttered shelves, and the pungent scent of tobacco mingled with the faint aroma of Turkish coffee, which simmered idly on a small iron stand near the fire. Holmes, cross-legged upon the ottoman and shrouded in his dressing gown, drew his bow languidly across the strings of his violin. The air quivered with the mournful strains of some obscure Hungarian lament. His eyes, half-lidded and distant, stared not at the instrument, but at the whirling tendrils of smoke that curled upward from the pipe clenched between his lips. "You are restless tonight," I ventured, placing my damp umbrella in the stand and warming my hands by the fire. "A man must have occupation, Watson," Holmes replied without turning. "In the absence of criminality, I must find solace in the minor keys of Bartók." He ceased his playing abruptly and glanced toward the door with that peculiar stillness which often preceded a revelation. "We shall have occupation tonight," he said, rising as a sharp rap echoed thrice upon our front door. "That, if I mistake not, is the tread of government shoes, polished but hurried. Prepare yourself, Watson. We are to be drawn, I fancy, into a matter of some national interest." I barely had time to straighten the cuffs of my jacket before Mrs. Hudson ushered in a figure whose very bearing confirmed Holmes's prediction to the letter. The man who entered was tall and lean, his face pale beneath the flicker of gaslight, and his eyes darted about the room with a nervous energy that bespoke both urgency and discomfort. His attire was that of an upper-level civil servant, an immaculately pressed frock coat, silk cravat, and kid gloves now sodden with rain. Yet despite his outward composure, I could detect a tremor in his fingers as he removed his hat and stepped forward. "Mr. Holmes," he began, his voice measured but strained, "I beg your pardon for the lateness of the hour, but the matter which brings me here admits of no delay." Holmes, who had resumed his seat and now studied our guest with keen amusement, motioned for him to continue. "My name is Arthur Blythe," the man said, "Senior Records Officer at the Treasury Office. I have come on behalf of my department, but more truthfully, on my own conscience. A peculiar occurrence has come to pass, sir. An occurrence which defies rational explanation and, I fear, may conceal something altogether darker." Holmes steepled his fingers. "Proceed, Mr. Blythe. The peculiar is my domain." Mr. Blythe took a breath, as if preparing himself to cross a threshold from reason into mystery. "It concerns an artifact of some historical age," he said. "An old ceremonial bell housed deep within the Treasury archives. Last night it rang." "A bell?" I echoed. "And what of it?" Mr. Blythe's lips tightened. "No one rang it, Doctor. Watson, and it hasn't moved in 200 years. Holmes leaned forward, the glint in his eye unmistakable. "You are certain of this, Mr. Blythe?" "As certain as I am standing here," the man replied. "The bell is affixed by iron brackets to a scaffold beam within the lowest chamber of the Treasury archives. It is purely ceremonial, a relic cast in the 17th century from salvaged royalist silver following the Civil War. Its clapper was long ago fused to the frame. It is not meant to sound. "And yet it did?" Holmes prompted. "At precisely 11 o'clock last evening, the toll echoed through the stone corridors, startling the night staff. When we arrived to investigate, myself among them, we found the area empty, save for one disturbing detail." Blythe paused, his brow furrowing. A junior clerk by the name of Adrian Mills had vanished. Holmes's brows rose a fraction. "There were no signs of a struggle," Blythe went on, "but beneath the bell's structure, someone, or something, had carved a series of symbols into the stone floor. They appeared ancient, though none present could identify their origin." I exchanged a glance with Holmes, whose eyes now bore the unmistakable light of engagement. "And you believe these events to be connected?" "I cannot say," said Blythe. "Only that the bell sounded, the man disappeared, and strange symbols remain. The affair is growing whispers. Some speak of a haunting. I, however, believe there may be more corporeal explanations, though perhaps no less dangerous." Holmes rose with sudden decisiveness. "Mr. Blythe, I believe we shall be dining late this evening. You've brought us, I dare say, a case most suitable for examination." Holmes folded his arms, the firelight catching a gleam in his eye. "And these markings, Mr. Blythe, have you brought any record?" Blythe produced from his inner coat pocket a folded parchment, which he laid upon the table. Holmes unfurled it with care. The charcoal rubbing displayed a curious arrangement of angular symbols, some resembling letters of the Latin alphabet, others more arcane, geometric lines crossed with stars and crescents, enclosed in circles. "I had our copyist make a tracing from the original," said Blythe. "They appear beneath the bell's mounting. No tool marks, no chips, etched as if by acid or time itself." Holmes studied them silently, his gaze narrowing. "This," he said at last, "is no modern hand. There is an echo here of monastic cryptography, perhaps a cipher employed during the Civil War. The arrangement is too deliberate to be vandalism." "I feared as much," said Blythe. "You see now why I came to you." "I see," Holmes murmured. "You suspect, I take it, that these markings are no mere curiosity." Blythe's lips thinned. "There have long been whispers among the older archivists, rumours of hidden orders, sealed chambers, even relics secreted away during the dissolution of the monarchy. Most of it dismissed as folklore, of course, but now—" Holmes handed the rubbing back to him. "Where superstition ends, criminal intent often begins. I believe, Watson, we are standing at the threshold of a very old door, and someone, it would seem, is determined to keep it closed." Mr. Blythe hesitated, then leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice. "There are broader implications, Mr. Holmes. If word of this reaches the wrong ears, if the press or, worse, foreign interests get wind of it, it could imperil the security of the Treasury, or at the very least, its reputation." "Foreign interests?" I queried. "Do you believe this may be a matter of espionage?" "I do not know what to believe, Dr. Watson, but I have seen too many small anomalies lately, files gone missing, unusual visitors requesting access to restricted records, odd delays in courier deliveries, and now, the bell." Holmes tapped his fingers rhythmically against the side of his chair. "You were right to come. But if this is indeed as sensitive as you suggest, Mr. Blythe, I must ask for full discretion and full access." "You shall have both," Blythe said gravely. Holmes nodded. "Then we shall begin at once. There is no time to lose." As Blythe retrieved his overcoat and prepared to depart, Holmes stepped aside and retrieved his pipe from the mantel, stuffing it idly as his eyes lingered on the departing figure. When the door had closed and the footsteps faded down the stairs, he turned to me with a quiet smile. "Well, Watson?" He seemed earnest, though undoubtedly troubled, I replied. "Indeed. But did you observe his shoes?" I blinked. "Polished, certainly." "Polished, yes. And yet a trace of red earth on the instep. Not from Whitehall, but from a clay-laden bank. Perhaps Hampstead. And his cufflink. Did you see it?" I shook my head. "One of the pair was gold, the other a dull brass imitation. A man of his station would not wear mismatched jewellery unless in haste or distress." "You think he hides something?" "I think he has told us only half the truth. And the other half, my dear Watson, lies beneath that bell." The following morning, we were summoned to the Treasury building by special appointment, escorted by Mr. Blythe himself through a succession of halls increasingly devoid of windows or natural light. At every turning, the passage narrowed, the air thickened, and the weight of history pressed down upon us like a silent tribunal. "There are few who tread this far," Blythe remarked as we descended a final iron staircase, the sound of our footsteps muffled by old stone. The lower archives house materials dating back to the reign of James I. Most of it is ceremonial, though some records are still classified even now. We arrived at a large oak door reinforced with rusting iron bands. A clerk unlocked it with a pair of long-handled keys, and we were admitted into the chamber beyond. It was an immense subterranean room with vaulted ceilings, its walls lined with lead-bound chests, iron filing cabinets, and glass cases filled with dusty charters, seals, and crumbling scrolls. But all our attention was drawn to the object at its centre. There, suspended within a scaffold of blackened iron, hung a bell of imposing size, perhaps 4 feet in diameter, with a dark, almost oily sheen to its surface. It was adorned with faded inscriptions in Latin, and the crest of the royal arms had been worked into its rim with a craftsman's hand long since vanished from the earth. Holmes said nothing at first. He walked slowly about the perimeter, his eyes narrowed. Then he approached the bell itself, his gaze falling to the base of the iron scaffolding and the smooth stone floor below. He crouched, his fingers lightly tracing the air above the symbols Mr. Blythe had earlier described. "They are here," Holmes said quietly. "And they are old." Holmes rose and turned his attention to the bell itself. With gloved hands, he ran his fingers along the rim, paused at the seam, and then stepped back to examine the clapper suspended within. "Observe, Watson," he said, pointing. "Do you note the irregularities?" I peered closer. The clapper, though appearing firmly affixed, bore fine linear abrasions along its edge, shallow and recent. As Holmes produced a lens and examined them under magnification, I could see what he meant. "Someone has interfered with it," I said. "Precisely. It may be fused by corrosion or design, but someone has attempted to shift it, and done so with care, likely under the cover of darkness. And see here," he added, indicating a faint metallic residue near the weld. "Evidence of a solvent. The bell's silence may have been deliberately disturbed." Blythe looked uneasy. But to what end? Holmes merely shook his head. The illusion of something supernatural often proves most effective when one seeks to divert attention from human agency. He then circled the scaffold once more, his footsteps echoing against the stone. "Note also the dust, how it has been recently disturbed in a narrow path toward the north alcove, but untouched elsewhere. Whoever tampered with this bell had a purpose beyond mere mischief. And I suspect," he added, glancing toward a rusted ventilation grate near the floor, "they may not have entered by the door." My eye followed his gaze. The grate bore faint scratches at its rim as if it had been pried loose. A chill crept into my spine. Holmes straightened. "This room has not been as empty as your records suggest, Mr. Blythe." While Blythe hurried away to fetch a catalogue, Holmes resumed his examination of the bell's hollow interior, producing a small, collapsible lantern from his coat. He leaned beneath the rim and illuminated the space inside. "Watson," he called. "Your assistance, if you please." I stepped forward and joined him beneath the great bronze mouth. There, wedged between an inner support and the bell's casing, was what appeared to be a fragment of parchment, brittle and stained with age. With great care, Holmes extracted it and laid it across the flat top of a nearby cabinet. Time had gnawed at its edges, and the ink had faded to a shade barely darker than the page, but some lines remained legible, Latin undoubtedly, interspersed with what appeared to be symbols resembling the cipher beneath the bell. The most visible phrase read, "Sub voce argentea, veritas latet." Beneath the silver voice, the truth lies hidden. Holmes gave a soft murmur of approval. An inscription, perhaps ceremonial in nature, or perhaps something more. The silver voice, surely a reference to the bell. But what truth lies beneath? There was also, faintly embossed in red wax, a half-broken seal, its insignia indistinct, save for the outline of a royal crown flanked by a pair of lions rampant. "This predates the current royal line," Holmes said, half to himself. "A Stuart crest, if I am not mistaken. Tell me, Watson, what truths might one conceal within the casting of a bell?" Before I could hazard a guess, Mr. Blythe returned, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. "Gentlemen," he said, "there is something you must see in the adjacent record room. Something troubling." Holmes took the parchment with him into the adjoining room Mr. Blythe had indicated. There, beneath a layer of protective glass in the record's alcove, lay a ledger of ciphered documents, catalogued but long undeciphered, described in the archive as Commonwealth-era encryptions, presumed obsolete. Holmes studied them closely, comparing the markings on the ledger's folios to those beneath the bell and upon the parchment. His expression sharpened, and I knew the spark of recognition had struck. "These are not meaningless scratches," he said. "This cipher is a variant of the Blake-Reed substitution, used by intelligence agents loyal to Cromwell during the waning years of the Protectorate." He traced one of the symbols with a gloved fingertip. "See here, this triangle surmounting a broken circle, meant to represent treachery undone. This was used to mark messages deemed high priority. And the presence of a crown beneath a cross denotes matters of state, often treason or hidden pardons issued outside of royal authority." Blythe's brows drew together. But what would such a cipher be doing under a ceremonial bell? "That," Holmes said, "is the crux. Someone knew what lay beneath that bell or suspected it. The cipher was likely inscribed as a warning, or perhaps an invocation to those who knew its meaning." "It could mean the bell itself conceals something," I said slowly. Holmes gave me a sidelong glance. "Quite so, Watson. And it would not be the first time a relic has held more than sound within its walls. The bell may have been cast for a voice, but I believe it was forged with a secret." It was shortly after our examination of the ciphered documents that we were introduced to Miss Evelina Carow, the Treasury archivist. A woman of perhaps 35, she possessed a quiet dignity and a scholar's bearing, her dress simple, her manner exact. She greeted us with a small nod, her spectacles resting upon the bridge of a nose accustomed to study. Holmes, ever the keen observer of character, inclined his head. "Miss Carow, I understand you were among the first to arrive following the incident. She confirmed this in a voice calm and measured. I was preparing the quarterly inventory when I heard the toll. I thought it a hallucination at first, an echo in the mind. But when the sound did not cease, I hurried to the archives. And what did you find? Nothing, only the bell swaying slightly. No other person. And shortly after, Mr. Mills was reported missing. Holmes's gaze lingered. You are fond of precision, I see. I must be, she replied. In my work, a misplaced comma can obscure a century. He smiled faintly. And what of the symbols beneath the bell? She hesitated. I did not report them. I feared, her voice dropped, being dismissed as fanciful. Quite the contrary, Holmes said. You were prudent. Tell me, have you seen them before? Only once, she whispered, in a ledger sealed since 1652, and that ledger is missing. Holmes exchanged a look with me. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. We were next introduced to Mr. Daniel Pike, head of internal security for the building. He was a square-shouldered man with a prematurely grey beard and an expression of seasoned distrust. His handshake was perfunctory, and his eyes narrowed slightly at Holmes's polite inquiries. I understand you were present during the inspection last evening, Holmes said. I was, Pike replied. Arrived not 5 minutes after the toll. Found nothing but frightened clerks and a swaying bell. Checked the doors and locks. Everything intact. And the missing clerk, Adrian Mills. He left no trace. Desk undisturbed, but I'd wager he's run off. Young men vanish all the time these days, gambling, debts or worse. Holmes nodded slowly. And what of the symbols? Pike frowned. Nonsense. Scribbles. We get all sorts down here. Cleaning staff, junior scribes. Could be graffiti for all I know. Holmes's gaze sharpened. I found them duplicated in Cromwellian ciphers. You believe that coincidence? Pike bristled slightly. I believe in guarding the premises, not decoding ancient gobbledygook. If something's missing, it's her department. He gestured curtly toward Miss Carrow. She mentioned a sealed ledger, I offered. He grunted. If she says so. As Pike turned away, Holmes leaned closer to me and murmured, Note the defensiveness, Watson. Either the man is merely proud, or there's something he dare not acknowledge. I nodded, and a seed of doubt began to take root. As the conversation drew to a close, Holmes excused himself from the group and wandered slowly back toward the bell chamber. I followed closely behind, sensing that his silence had grown more focused, more calculating. You recall the vent, he said quietly. Of course, the one near the north alcove. He nodded. There is more to it than its placement. While the bell draws attention, that grate may have been the true entry point for someone seeking the chamber unnoticed. We approached it again. Holmes knelt, producing a thin metal probe from his coat pocket. He inserted it along the edge of the frame, lifting the corner slightly. It gave with a soft creak. There, he said, pointing to a faint smear near the lower edge. Soot. Recent. This duct may not have seen use in decades, and yet it bears the trace of movement. And here, on the surrounding stone, see the slight drag pattern, like a boot or a sack being pulled through. Could it have been Mills? I asked. Possibly, or someone making it appear so. He sniffed the air. The scent of lamp oil, not strong, but present. Whoever came through here brought light with them. He replaced the grate carefully and rose. The official path to this room is guarded, monitored. But through the ventilation system, one could access the archives unnoticed, particularly if one were familiar with the layout. I considered this. Then someone inside the Treasury. Or someone with assistance, Holmes replied. He dusted off his hands and looked toward the doorway. The facts are assembling, Watson, but they have yet to arrange themselves. We must pursue this further. As we stepped from the room, I could not shake the sense that we were being watched from the shadows that curled behind the stone. We had scarcely returned from the bell chamber when Mr. Pike reappeared, his manner clipped and vaguely triumphant. "If it pleases Mr. Holmes," he said with affected formality, "I've found something that may cast a different light on your inquiries." We followed him down a short corridor to a narrow workroom adjoining the archive. He gestured toward a desk, plain, well used, and unmistakably the property of Miss Evelina Carrow. "Observe," he said, unlocking the lower drawer and sliding it open. Not exactly standard issue for a Treasury archivist. Inside, nestled among parchment and correspondence, was a small velvet pouch. Pike tipped it out onto the desktop, and with a soft clink, several ancient-looking coins rolled into view, silver crowns and half-sovereigns of a type I had not seen in any circulation. Holmes bent over the coins with immediate interest. 17th century, Spanish and English mixed, some bearing the mark of Charles I. Pike folded his arms. Stolen, perhaps? Smuggled into her possession? Seems a curious coincidence. Miss Carrow, summoned by the noise, stood silently in the doorway. Her expression did not waver, but her hands were clenched at her sides. "I did not place those there," she said, her voice low and steady. "Convenient," Pike muttered, "but not convincing." Holmes raised a hand. "Let us not be hasty. A planted piece of evidence is as dangerous as an overlooked one, and motive, I find, rarely hides in drawers." He turned to Miss Carrow. "Have you ever seen these coins before?" "Never," she replied firmly. Holmes looked once more at the desk, then at Pike. "Curious indeed. Tell me, Mr. Pike, who holds the only keys to this room?" Pike hesitated. "Myself, and Miss Carrow. That's all." Holmes said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. Miss Carrow stepped forward, her composure still intact. "If we are now to compare reputations," she said evenly, "then perhaps Mr. Pike would care to explain why he was dismissed from his former post at the Foreign Office." Pike's head snapped round. "That's a lie!" Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Is it?" Miss Carrow continued, her gaze never leaving Pike. "My late uncle was a clerk in Whitehall. He remembered your name. You were reassigned under quiet terms after a misplaced diplomatic parcel nearly cost a treaty negotiation. That was never made public, was it?" Pike's face had reddened. "What's that got to do with anything?" "It has everything to do with trust," Holmes interjected smoothly. "Your earlier hostility toward Miss Carrow, your attempt to redirect suspicion, and now the revelation of your questionable past. None of these are insignificant." "She's lying," Pike exclaimed. Holmes ignored the outburst. "Miss Carrow, when did you last access this desk?" "Yesterday morning, when I filed the Stuart Vault Register." "And it was locked thereafter?" "Yes." Holmes glanced at Pike. "Then you alone had the means to plant the coins, if such was the case. An unpleasant hypothesis, I admit, but no more so than one which falsely maligns an innocent." Pike looked from Holmes to Miss Carrow and then back again, before storming out of the room without a word. Holmes watched him go, then turned to me with a faint smile. "Interesting, is it not, Watson? When the shadows grow long, the past often casts the darkest one." Later that afternoon, Holmes and I repaired to the British Library, where he had arranged to consult a number of obscure volumes on 17th century metallurgy, monarchical symbolism, and treasury histories. For over an hour, he leafed through pages with increasing intensity, while I occupied myself with a dusty volume on Cromwellian cryptography. "Ah," Holmes murmured at last, tapping a passage with his finger. "Here it is." He turned the book toward me. The section described the confiscation and melting down of royalist plate during the Commonwealth years. Among the items listed, ceremonial maces, silver goblets, and notably, a bell, cast anew from the sacred regalia of the House of Stuart. This bell, Holmes said, was no ordinary instrument. It was forged, according to this account, not merely from any silver, but from items taken directly from the royal chapel. Communion vessels, signet rings, and even fragments of the coronation crown were used in the melt. He sat back. "Now, consider the inscription we found. Beneath the silver voice, the truth lies hidden. What if it were more than metaphor?" "You think the bell conceals something physical?" I asked. "I am nearly certain of it," he replied. "A Stuart pardon, perhaps. A document of political significance. Something that was meant to be kept hidden, but not destroyed." I frowned. "Why hide it in a bell?" "Because sound masks truth," he said. "And what better vault than one no man dare open for fear of desecrating history?" He tapped the table thoughtfully. "And now, someone, perhaps several parties, believe they can retrieve it." The clapper was disturbed not merely to frighten the staff, but as an attempt to access what lies within. An amateurish attempt at that. "And Mills," Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Either a pawn or a witness. One whose knowledge became inconvenient." He stood. "Come, Watson. The bell is not the only thing that tolls in this case. The hour advances, and with it, danger." Our return to Baker Street the following day found Holmes in a state of relentless inquiry. He had dispatched no fewer than 3 telegrams and requested a series of ledgers from the British Museum's restricted vaults, documents so obscure they bore seals from centuries long past. By early afternoon, his efforts bore fruit. A faded register, catalogued under Esoteric Associations Parliamentary Period, revealed a name that recurred alongside various references to encrypted correspondence and concealed allegiances: the Bell Covenant. Holmes traced the name with a fingertip. "A brotherhood founded during the waning years of the English Civil War," he explained. "Cromwell's spies, loyal only in name, preserved secrets that could destroy both parliamentarian and royalist claims. Their motto was, 'Truth rings louder than loyalty.'" "And you believe Mills was connected to this?" I asked. "I believe Mills stumbled upon them," Holmes replied. "Consider the cipher, the bell, the parchment. A man with access to archival records might begin asking questions. And if those questions brushed too near a dormant conspiracy, one still buried beneath stone and ceremony, it would not be unthinkable for such a man to be removed." Holmes produced a narrow dossier delivered by private courier that morning. Adrian Mills was known to the College of Heralds. He had a personal interest in royal legitimacy and land inheritance. His own family once laid claim to a manor confiscated during the interregnum. He closed the folder. Now imagine a document, a royal pardon, sealed and lost, capable of restoring that claim. I exhaled. So he sought the truth, and in doing so became a threat. Holmes nodded gravely. The covenant may have withered, but its shadows linger. Someone else knew of the bell's legacy and acted to silence Mills before the secret rang louder than intended. That evening, as we walked the fog-bound streets toward Baker Street, Holmes was more silent than usual. Though his steps remained swift, his gaze darted often behind us, and his hand never strayed far from the inside pocket of his coat. "You've noticed it too?" he asked, without looking at me. "The footsteps," I replied. Twice they matched our pauses. And yet, no figure emerged. Holmes offered only the faintest nod. We quickened our pace and turned at random into a side street, only to emerge again on a better-lit thoroughfare. Whoever followed us, if indeed they still did, made no further sound. By the time we reached Baker Street, the atmosphere had grown oppressively close. Holmes dismissed Mrs. Hudson with a courteous word and retreated at once to the sitting room. There, he opened the violin case which lay upon the side table and froze. Nestled between the instrument and its velvet lining was a single sheet of heavy cream paper, folded once and sealed with a broken red wax emblem. Holmes broke the seal and unfolded it. I stepped beside him to read. The message was brief, but chilling in its simplicity. The voice must not ring. Let the silence remain. The bell tolls for those who trespass. No signature, no initials, only a final line penned in the same ink. This is your only warning. Holmes stared at it for a moment, then placed it beside the violin without a word. The air in the room grew colder despite the fire, and a silence fell between us that neither dared break. At last, he spoke. "They are watching, Watson, and they are not done." Long into the night, Holmes sat in his armchair, limbs folded, the letter from the violin case resting upon his knee like a relic of dread. I did not disturb him, for I recognized the expression upon his face, a stillness that masked the storm of calculation within. When at last he stirred, it was not with alarm, but with clarity. "There is always a pattern," he said softly, "even in shadows." He rose and walked to the window, drawing back the curtain a fraction. Three pieces still elude me: the motive behind the parchment's concealment, the precise fate of Mills, and the identity of our most recent observer. "You believe they are connected?" "Undeniably," Holmes replied. "No one would take such a risk for a mere legend. The parchment we found may represent not only a political pardon, but a legal instrument of land reparation, enough to reverse centuries of possession. That has a value beyond sentiment." He paused. Blythe spoke of internal scandal, yet he volunteered little thereafter. Pike deflected, and Miss Carrow was nearly discredited. The false trail was well laid, but it leads to a single source, someone who fears what might be discovered if the bell were opened. "And the warning?" "Desperation," Holmes said, "not theatricality. They grow aware that I approach the truth." He crossed the room, selecting his violin with care. As he tuned it, his tone turned more meditative. The bell was forged to echo. But this one hides something greater than sound. The craftsmanship was symbolic. A seal, an oubliette cast in silver. "And what will you do?" I asked. He brought the bow across the strings in a soft, haunting cadence. The melody rose gently, winding like smoke. "We return tomorrow," he said. "I shall speak to Lestrade and arrange for the bell to be moved. The illusion of change may provoke the truth." He played another note, long, resonant, full of foreboding. "And when the sound is heard once more, Watson, the silence will end." The following morning, Holmes moved with a swiftness and purpose that admitted no delay. By 10 o'clock, an official memorandum had been delivered to the Treasury office, signed by Sir Reginald Fairborn of the Ministry of Antiquities, whose forged seal Holmes had produced with startling ease. The memorandum declared that the ceremonial bell housed within the Treasury archives was to be removed immediately and transported for emergency preservation to the British Museum. The reasons were vague: corrosive instability and threat of collapse, but they sufficed. Holmes handed the forged directive to Blythe, who, though visibly disturbed, dared not question its authority. "This will stir attention," he murmured. "That is precisely the intent," Holmes replied. "Our adversary has remained in the shadows thus far, but this ruse shall draw them into the light. They believe themselves clever. I intend to show them what true precision entails." Lestrade was summoned quietly from Scotland Yard and instructed to make arrangements for discreet surveillance of the building that evening. "No uniforms," Holmes insisted. "No rattling sabres. We do not hunt a common thief, but a man who believes himself untouchable." As we prepared to depart, Holmes paused at the hearth and drew his pocket watch from his coat. "The bell will toll once more, Watson, but it shall not be by ghost or legend. It shall be by necessity. And when it does—" He snapped the watch shut and met my gaze with a glint of steel. "The hand that reaches for it shall find us waiting." Midnight found us once more in the Treasury archives, cloaked in silence and waiting beneath the cold iron gaze of the ancient bell. Lestrade crouched behind a filing cabinet, revolver in hand, while Holmes and I took cover near the scaffold's base. The chamber was lit only by the dim glow of a shaded lantern placed near the eastern wall, its purpose twofold: to lure the intruder and to illuminate his descent into self-betrayal. Holmes had been uncommonly still all evening, speaking only when necessary. His eyes had remained fixed on the bell's hollow, and from time to time he cast a glance toward the ventilation grate. "The mind which orchestrates this affair," he whispered, "is no common schemer. It is precise, methodical, and desperate." We waited in that eerie stillness for nearly an hour. The ticking of my pocket watch had never seemed so loud, nor the sound of my own breathing so intrusive. Then, at last, it came. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, padding across the stones like a predator stalking its prey. Holmes held up a hand, and we froze. The sound approached from the southern corridor, not the main entrance, but the older passage seldom used by staff. A shadow passed the threshold. A figure entered, tall, cloaked, and gloved. No face could be seen beneath the wide-brimmed hat, but the carriage was unmistakably purposeful. The figure made no sound as it crossed the floor, moving straight toward the bell. Holmes did not stir. The intruder paused at the scaffold. A gloved hand reached for the frame, then drew forth a narrow implement, a crowbar, fashioned to fit the seams of the bell's underside. The trap was sprung. Holmes rose. "That will do," he said clearly. The figure spun, and in that moment, the veil was lifted. The intruder recoiled, but too late. Lestrade stepped from the shadows, his revolver raised. "Hands where I can see them," he barked. "No sudden moves." Holmes approached, calm as ever, though his eyes gleamed with hard certainty. The figure stood motionless for a moment, then reached up and removed the hat and scarf. I drew in a breath. It was Mr. Arthur Blythe. His face, once composed and professional, was now tight with fury and a kind of trembling resolve. There was no pretense left, only the exhausted expression of a man whose mask had finally fractured. "So," Holmes said softly, "you return to claim what was never yours to begin with." Blythe's voice was hoarse. "You don't understand. That document, if it exists, it belongs to my family. The land was ours. My great-grandfather was cast out by Cromwell's decree. What was stolen should be restored." Holmes folded his arms. "And so you arranged the haunting. You moved the clapper, staged the tolling, frightened the staff, framed Miss Carrow, then used Mills to decipher the symbols. When he discovered too much, you paid him off and sent him abroad." Blythe's eyes narrowed. He went willingly, but not silently, Holmes replied. Blythe took a step back toward the bell. I won't let you take it. It's my right. Holmes's voice became colder. No, Mr. Blythe, it is your obsession. Lestrade moved swiftly, seizing Blythe's arm and securing it with practiced ease. The crowbar clattered to the ground. Holmes turned to me. It is time, Watson. Let us see what truth the bell has hidden for centuries. Mr. Blythe stood frozen beneath the great bell, the soft glow of the lantern casting deep hollows beneath his eyes. He seemed diminished, no longer the composed civil servant of Whitehall, but a man unravelled, cornered by his own ambition. Holmes took a step forward, his voice low and unrelenting. You assumed the bell's legend was forgotten. You gambled that no one would link its casting to the spoils of Cromwell's conquest, or suspect that something more than metal had been poured into its mould. Blythe said nothing. You tampered with the clapper, Holmes continued. Loosened just enough to sound once in the dead of night. Enough to frighten. Enough to seed the notion of a haunting. Still, Blythe remained silent. You manipulated Mills, offering him access, encouraging his research, and when he came too close to the truth, you made him disappear. Not through violence. No, that would have drawn notice. Instead, a bribe, passage arranged, a quiet departure. At this, Blythe shifted slightly. Holmes's eyes narrowed. But you underestimated Mills. Before he left, he hid something. Something you had not yet seen. That is why you returned tonight. You believed the document remained within the bell. Blythe's composure cracked. It belongs to my family. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Holmes said coldly. You sought not justice, but possession. You framed Miss Carrow to deflect suspicion, planted coins to cast doubt, and used Pike's animosity to your advantage. There was a pause. Then, from the doorway, Miss Carrow's voice rang firm and clear. And nearly destroyed my career in the process. Blythe's shoulders sagged. Holmes gave a brief nod to Lestrade. Let us finish it, he said. We have the man. Now we must hear what the bell has to say. At Holmes's command, Lestrade stepped forward to secure the man, but in that same breath, Blythe turned and bolted for the corridor. It was not a shout, but a sharp word from Holmes that startled me most. Now, Lestrade! The inspector surged forward, and I followed, heart pounding. Blythe had reached the stone passage and darted toward the servants' stair, his footsteps clattering with reckless abandon. But his desperation outpaced his judgment. A misstep, one ill-placed foot upon the damp edge of the stair, and Blythe stumbled. He caught himself, just barely, before Lestrade reached him and seized his arm in a grip that brooked no resistance. Let go, Blythe shouted. You don't know what you're interfering with. Oh, I think we do, Lestrade muttered grimly. Now be still, sir, before you do yourself further injury. Holmes arrived a moment later, his breath composed, his tone as precise as ever. You've run far enough, Mr. Blythe. But it was not your feet that failed you. It was your mind. Blythe sagged in Lestrade's grasp, deflated and gasping. Holmes turned to me. Watson, return to the bell. I shall follow shortly. Tonight, we close the circle. As I moved back through the corridor, I could hear Lestrade murmuring to his captive, words I could not distinguish, but which had all the weight of finality. And Holmes, as always, moved not with vengeance, but with purpose. The truth had been cornered. Now it only remained to be revealed. When Holmes returned to the archive chamber, he did not hesitate. With Lestrade standing watch over the subdued Blythe and Miss Carrow, watching in solemn silence, he approached the bell's scaffold, producing a tool from his coat, a slender brass lever forged for delicate seams. With deft precision, he pried open the panel beneath the bell's mounting, one nearly invisible to the eye, yet now revealed to careful inspection. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed faintly, and at last a narrow compartment, hollowed within the rim itself, gave way. From its depths, Holmes withdrew a sealed scroll, bound in faded red silk and stamped with a wax impression, the royal seal of Charles I. All gathered leaned in. Holmes unwrapped it slowly. The parchment, though worn with age, was miraculously preserved. He read aloud, "To whom it may concern in the aftermath of this grievous discord, let it be known that the lands of Greystone, herein taken under parliamentary writ, are henceforth pardoned and returned to the rightful descendants of the House of Lewin, by grace of sovereign judgment and the hand of the Crown." Watson, that is, I, felt the room tighten around us. Holmes looked to Miss Carrow. "This, you see, is what Mr. Blythe sought, a royal pardon of considerable legal consequence, nullified by the monarchy's fall, but potent enough to upend modern claims if brought to light." Lestrade folded his arms. "Would never hold in court, surely?" Holmes shrugged. "Perhaps not. But to a man obsessed with legacy, it was power enough." He turned to Blythe, who now sat slumped in resignation. "You were not wrong to believe your family had been wronged, but you were wrong to think the past owed you a future built upon deceit." Miss Carrow stepped forward. "What will become of it now?" Holmes carefully returned the scroll to its casing. "It shall be submitted to the archives, under proper authority, preserved, studied, and guarded, as history, not weaponry." He straightened and stepped back from the bell. "The voice has spoken, Watson, and this time the truth did ring." It was 2 evenings later, as the shadows lengthened once more across Baker Street, that Holmes finally offered his full account of the affair. The fireplace crackled gently, and the sealed scroll, now safely housed in a protective folio, rested on the table between us like a relic from another age. "I have no doubt," Holmes began, "that Mr. Blythe believed himself a steward of justice, or at least of inherited entitlement. But make no mistake, Watson. What we witnessed was not an act of restitution, but of greed camouflaged by antiquity." He took up his pipe, tapping it absently. "The legend of the bell was not widely known, but Blythe had access to materials others overlooked, archival whispers, unrecorded margins, and correspondence long buried in government binders. From these fragments, he pieced together a possibility: that a royal pardon of great legal power had been concealed in a symbol of national ceremony, a Stuart relic hidden in plain sight, protected by history's reverence." I leaned forward. "And he planned to use it to reclaim ancestral lands?" "Precisely. The House of Lewin, his mother's line, had once held vast estates before Cromwell's commissioners seized them. The pardon would not have survived a court of modern law, but Blythe believed that if he could obtain it, authenticate it quietly, and approach the current title holders, he might settle the matter through influence rather than litigation. And if not, well, a man with knowledge of state archives might see to it that records were lost and new ones made." I exhaled. A quiet reclamation of fortune, masked as antiquarian curiosity. Holmes nodded. And under that mask, he nearly succeeded. But like many who attempt to rewrite the past, he failed to account for those who read history not as opportunity, but as responsibility. He gestured to the folio. That parchment may yet live on, but not as leverage, as truth. Nothing more, and nothing less. Holmes rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the soot-grey skyline of London. "It is curious, Watson," he said, "how often men invoke the supernatural when it serves to cloak a very human vice." He turned back to me. Blythe's greatest success, in many ways, was not the forgery or the concealment. It was the bell itself. That single toll, delivered with precise theatrical timing, did more to paralyze his colleagues than any overt threat ever could. He returned to his chair. He had loosened the clapper only slightly, applying a corrosive solvent to weaken its seal, just enough that a change in humidity, a subtle vibration, or a light mechanical jolt could produce the desired chime. It rang once, loudly, at precisely the moment when few would be present, and most would be susceptible to fear. I recalled the first description Mr. Blythe had given us, and thus began the talk of ghosts. Holmes nodded. Precisely what he intended. He wished to discredit the idea of rational intrusion. Better for the staff to believe in hauntings than in theft. Better for Caro and Mills to doubt their own senses than to ask why a sealed relic had begun to ring again. "And the symbols on the floor?" I asked. "Crafted by Blythe's own hand," Holmes replied. "Copied from historical ledgers, their obscurity made them more powerful. Not because they were understood, but because they were not. He knew no one in that office would decipher them, only that they would be unnerved." He drew a slow breath. "Fear is a more efficient sentinel than any man with a whistle and a lamp. Blythe turned superstition into strategy." I shook my head in wonder. "You make it sound almost admirable." Holmes arched a brow. "A clever illusionist is still a liar, Watson, and in time the fog always clears." Holmes moved to his desk and retrieved a file, thin, neatly ordered, and marked with a modest government crest. "Adrian Mills," he said, handing it to me. 29 years old. Formerly a student of historical jurisprudence. Assigned to the archives 6 months prior. A quiet man by most accounts. Bookish, solitary, but observant. I skimmed the report. He had a keen eye for patterns. "Which is precisely what drew Blythe to him," Holmes said. "He needed someone capable of deciphering the code, but without the confidence to question his motives. Mills fit the mould perfectly." He took the file back and placed it down with care. Blythe gave him access to restricted materials under the pretense of a departmental study, and Mills, unaware of the broader scheme, set about decoding the ciphers, believing it a sanctioned project. "But he grew suspicious," I said. "Yes. He began asking questions of Miss Caro, of other clerks, perhaps even of Blythe himself, and that," Holmes said, "was his undoing." I felt a chill run through me. "Was he harmed?" "No," Holmes replied. "That was the one line Blythe would not cross." Instead, he arranged for Mills to be sent abroad under the guise of a special assignment. A sudden transfer. Mills accepted, but before leaving, he'd left behind a clue. A half-page of copied symbols sealed into the back of an irrelevant ledger. It was Miss Caro who found it. Holmes gave a rare smile. It was her observation, not mine, that first confirmed Blythe's orchestration. Mills had placed the truth in plain sight, trusting someone would eventually see. And now? Holmes's gaze softened. Now, Mills is safe. A letter has been sent. He will return to find that the shadows have lifted. Holmes sat back, steepling his fingers in the familiar gesture of deep contemplation. He had, for some time now, been studying the series of events leading to our latest resolution. His voice, measured and deliberate, broke the silence. "Let us return, Watson, to the issue of the coins." I glanced at him, perplexed. "The coins, Holmes? You've already shown their significance." Holmes nodded. "Indeed, but the true nature of their purpose has yet to be fully uncovered. Mr. Pike, through his aggression and suspicion, inadvertently drew our attention to the wrong party." I shook my head. "But surely Miss Carrow—" "Ah, Miss Carrow," Holmes interrupted with a faint smile. "She was but the perfect pawn in a larger game. The coins were planted in her desk by Blythe himself, a deliberate move to steer the investigation towards her." I stared at him. "A deliberate frame-up?" "Exactly. Blythe knew that Miss Carrow's quiet, conscientious nature would make her the ideal scapegoat. By placing the ancient coins, items of such obvious rarity, into her drawer, he sought to manufacture a reason to implicate her in the theft. After all, the coins, seemingly unrelated to the bell's origins, would confuse the matter. "But why?" I asked, still struggling to follow the intricacies of the plan. "Because the real crime, Watson, was never about the coins. It was always about the pardon. Blythe needed to divert suspicion away from himself and onto someone else, to buy himself time to complete his task unimpeded. If Miss Carrow were blamed, the true motive would remain hidden." "And so," Holmes continued, "the coins were not merely a red herring. They were the smoke that concealed the fire." I pondered his words, and the sheer audacity of the plan took root in my mind. "Clever," I murmured. "Deceptively simple." "Not simple, Watson, just effective," Holmes replied. "And now that the coins have been properly examined, we can turn our attention to the matter that truly matters." As I reflected on the case, a profound sense of awe and admiration washed over me. Holmes, with his unparalleled genius, had once again woven together the disparate threads of a complex mystery, uncovering truths that others would have dismissed as mere coincidence. Yet, in his method, there was a distinct clarity that set him apart, not only as a detective, but as a man with a singular perspective on the world. Where others might have seen the clues as unrelated, Holmes had discerned their deeper meaning and connected them with the precision of a maestro conducting a symphony. The coins, the cipher, the cryptic symbols, each was a deliberate step in Blythe's master plan, and each, when examined with the right eye, revealed more of the sinister plot. But what struck me most was Holmes's ability to navigate the maze of human greed and ambition, uncovering motives that were buried beneath layers of deception. It was not the bell that held the key to this case, but the greed that pulsed beneath the surface of the very men who sought to control it. And therein lay the irony of it all. Blythe's desire for power and his belief that history could be rewritten for his own gain had led him into a trap of his own making. For all his cunning, for all his careful planning, he had failed to understand one simple truth. The truth itself is a force that cannot be so easily manipulated or concealed. Holmes had exposed him not through brute force or accusation, but through observation, through the smallest, most telling detail. The missing ledger, the cipher, the ill-placed coins. They had all spoken a language that only Holmes could decipher, and in the end, it was that very genius, that unyielding clarity of thought, that had led to Blythe's downfall. As I sat in silence, pondering the events that had unfolded, I realized something else, that this case, like so many others before it, was not merely an exercise in logic. It was a reminder of the fragility of human nature. Blythe had believed himself untouchable, above reproach, but in his arrogance, He had underestimated the one thing that even the most cunning mind cannot escape: the consequences of one's actions. The case had come to its close, and yet the weight of it still lingered in the air, as heavy as the smoke that curled from Holmes's pipe. He sat once more at his desk, his fingers lightly tracing the edges of the violin case beside him. He had not played since the case began, and now, as the evening drew to a close, he seemed to find solace in the quiet preparation of the instrument. The flames danced lazily in the hearth, and the room was filled with a kind of peace that only follows the resolution of a great mystery. "I suppose, Watson, you are quite relieved that this case has come to a close," Holmes remarked quietly, his voice as even as ever, but with an undercurrent of something more, perhaps satisfaction, perhaps contemplation. "I am," I replied, though I find myself pondering the ironies of it all. Blythe's greed, his manipulation of history, his attempt to rewrite his family's fate. It seems almost tragic in the end. Holmes looked up, his gaze sharp and calculating. Tragic, yes, but not unexpected. Men have always sought to bend the course of history to their will. And yet, for all their scheming, history remains an immutable force. The past cannot be rewritten. Not by Blythe, not by anyone. He paused, setting down the violin and turning toward me. And that, he continued, is where justice differs from ambition. Justice is a force that cannot be altered or bent, even by the most brilliant minds. It is, in the end, always revealed, whether through the bell's toll or the careful unravelling of a mystery. I sat back, considering his words. There was a quiet finality to the case that I could not shake, as though the very rhythm of history had been reasserted in a single moment. The bell, which had tolled with such purpose, had become a symbol not just of power, but of truth, a truth that could not be concealed no matter how hard one tried. Holmes rose then, as if stirred by some inner impulse, and picked up the violin. With practised ease, he began to play, his bow sweeping across the strings with a soft, mournful tune. The melody filled the room, echoing the quiet resolution of the case, a resolution that had been written not in coins or cryptic symbols, but in the unwavering clarity of truth. As the last notes of the violin faded into the night, Holmes spoke once more, his voice low and reflective. "History, Watson, rings louder than justice, but it is justice that echoes through time." And with that, the case was truly closed. As the case drew to a close, Holmes sat back in his armchair, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest as he gazed thoughtfully into the embers of the fire. I had not spoken a word for several minutes, my mind still turning over the intricacies of the case we had just solved. Finally, it was Holmes who broke the silence. "You see, Watson," he began, his voice soft yet resolute. "Blythe's greatest mistake was not in seeking what he believed was his due. No, his true error was in thinking that he could manipulate history without consequence. In the end, truth, whether it be hidden beneath a bell or buried in the pages of ancient records, has a way of revealing itself. Time and again, I have seen men try to escape its pull, only to find that they are swept back into its current, inevitably at the moment of their greatest pride." I nodded, contemplating his words. The bell, once a symbol of fear and mystery, now lay silent in the archives. The truth, like the toll of that bell, had rung out clearly and decisively, just as Holmes had predicted. "History does not belong to the living to rewrite as they see fit," Holmes continued, his gaze fixed on the crackling flames. "It belongs to the past, and to those who seek the truth within it. Blythe sought to control his family's destiny, but in the process, he became ensnared by his own ambition. I could see the faintest trace of sadness in Holmes's eyes. The past is often a cage, Watson, but it is a cage that cannot be broken. It is a cage of our own making, and we can only find freedom by accepting it. As we pondered the resolution of the case, I turned to Holmes with a question that had been plaguing my mind. "But Holmes," I said, "what do you think was Blythe's greatest mistake? Was it the forged bell toll, or the coin planted in Miss Carrow's drawer? Or perhaps it was his overconfidence in thinking he could outwit the truth?" Holmes gave me a small smile, as if enjoying the depth of my curiosity. "That, Watson, is a mystery that only the reader can truly solve. What do you think was Blythe's fatal error? Was it his greed, his manipulation of the past, or the way he underestimated the persistence of truth?" As the fire dimmed and the case reached its conclusion, I invite you, dear viewers, to share your thoughts on Blythe's mistake. Do you agree with Holmes's assessment of his error? Or do you see a different turning point where his fate was sealed? If you've enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to subscribe for more Sherlock Holmes adventures, where each case brings new puzzles, clever deductions, and timeless lessons. Share this tale with your friends and family, and let them join in the mystery solving. After all, in the world of Sherlock Holmes, the answer is always just one question away.